The pack called her Faithless, until 100 wolves knelt at her feet. The fever came in on a trader's cart, 9 days before I understood anything about faith. I had been king of Dravenhold for 11 years. In that time I had broken 2 border sieges, settled a succession war in the Eastern Ridge territories, and buried my mate, Sela, in the cold ground of the upper courtyard while my wolf went quiet inside me and did not stir again. I was not a sentimental man. I was not a man who believed in fated bonds a second time, in destiny arriving twice at the same door. The hold ran because I ran it, precisely, without sentiment, with the kind of measured force that kept a plateau kingdom alive through hard winters and harder politics. My hold lords respected me. My pack feared me in the way that good packs fear a king who means what he says. My wolves, the bonded animals that slept along the outer wall kennels, were healthy and obedient and came when they were called. None of that prepared me for the 9th night. The fever arrived in a grain cart on the 18th of the harvest month. By the time my head healer, Das, identified it, 3 workers in the lower east wing had already spiked temperatures that bent them double. Das sealed the east corridor by sundown. Protocol, he told me, was clear. Isolate, monitor from the sealed threshold, wait for the sickness to run its course or exhaust itself. The hold healers had a rotation for exactly this circumstance. They would take turns standing at the threshold, observing through the iron-barred partition, sending in water and broth on a rope-lowered tray. Standing at the threshold, observing through bars. The sick were 14 by the 2nd morning, 22 by the 4th day. I walked the upper gallery each evening, a long iron-railed corridor overlooking the lower east wing's main passage, and I watched the rope-lowered trays, and I watched the healers rotate in and out of their observation post, fresh and clean and careful, and I watched the people inside grow worse without hands on them. It was on the 4th evening, from the upper gallery, that I first saw the woman they called Faithless. She was small. That is what I noticed first, not her face, not her dress, but the size of her, the way she moved through the lower passage as if she were accustomed to taking up exactly as much space as she needed, and not 1 fraction more. She carried a lamp in her left hand and a kit bag over her right shoulder, and she was walking toward the sealed threshold from inside the ward, which meant she had already passed through it, which meant she had found a way in that my head healer had apparently missed. I went downstairs. By the time I reached the ground floor and crossed to the east wing, she was inside. I could see her through the iron bars of the observation partition, kneeling beside one of the cots, the lamp set on the floor beside her knee, her hands moving with a kind of careful economy over a man who had been shaking for 3 days. She was not shaking. She was not wearing any protective layering beyond a plain apron. She was speaking to the man in a voice I could not hear through the partition, low and even, and whatever she was saying, his shaking had quieted. I called through the bars. She looked up. Her face was, I will not say it was the most beautiful face I had ever seen, because that is not the truth and I was not given to romanticizing. It was a still face, the kind of face that has learned to keep its weather inside. She had dark eyes that took in the iron bars and the crown at my brow and my expression, and sorted all of it quickly, without visible alarm. "Who let you in?" I said. "The latch on the eastern supply hatch has a gap," she said. "I've been using it since the 2nd day." I looked at her for a moment. "You've been in there since the 2nd day." "In the evenings I have other work during the day." She paused. "I'm not going to catch it." "Everyone catches it." "Not everyone." She turned back to the man on the cot. "Are you going to have someone seal the supply hatch?" I thought about it. "Not tonight," I said. She nodded as if this were the expected answer and went back to work. Her name was Marin Ashfield. I had my steward, Bren, pull her registration from the entry logs before the 5th morning. She had arrived with a traveling healer named Dawson Ware, an older man who worked the plateau circuit, small holds, outlying settlements, the kind of medical work that did not pay well and did not attract men who had other options. Dawson Ware had registered her as his assistant. She had no PAC mark, the circular tattoo at the base of the throat that indicated PAC affiliation, sponsorship, standing. She had no kin listed. She had no house name in the registry. Ashfield was a field name, a working name, the kind given to children who arrived without family at charitable institutions. The Hold Lords called people like her faithless. It was the old word. It had started as a descriptor for those without PAC bond, without the spiritual tie to a wolf line that the old families considered the basis of moral character, and it had slid over generations into a general insult for anyone without rank, without affiliation, without the paperwork of belonging. Faithless. As if faith itself required a tattoo and a sponsor. Lord Cavan, my senior Hold Lord, used the word at the morning briefing on the 5th day. He had learned she was inside the ward. He was not pleased. A faithless woman, he said, with no training DOS could verify, with no standing in this hold, had inserted herself into a sealed sickness ward and was touching the sick with ungloved hands, and he paused here for effect. She had been sleeping in the supply corridor between shifts, which he found irregular and probably dangerous, and possibly a violation of hold ordinances regarding unsponsored persons in restricted wings. Is she making anyone sicker? I said. Cavan blinked. That isn't the question, is whether she has the standing to be there at all. Is she making anyone sicker? I said again. A silence. We don't know, Cavan admitted. Then leave her alone, I said, and moved the briefing forward. I went to the gallery again that evening. I told myself it was an inspection. I walked the gallery most evenings anyway, habit and duty, a king knowing what his hold looked like at rest. I did not tell myself I was going to watch her. I went, and she was already inside, and I watched her. She worked for 3 hours without stopping. She had a system. She moved bed to bed in the same order, checking each patient, adjusting, speaking to those who were conscious, sitting quietly beside those who were not. She had no grand methods. She did not perform. She laid her hands where they needed to be laid, and she kept her voice below the level of the fever noise, and she did not leave when the night deepened and the ward got harder to be inside. My wolf was quiet. He had been quiet for 11 years. But that 5th evening, standing at the gallery rail, watching her sit beside a woman who was crying and hold both her hands without a word, I felt something. Not movement. Not the surge of recognition I had felt when I first bonded with Sella, that bright, undeniable crack of the world rearranging. This was quieter, a kind of warmth at the back of my chest, below the sternum, that I had no name for and did not reach for. I went back to my rooms. On the 6th day, the count was 31. On the 7th, 43. 3 of the first ward had died, 2 elders, 1 young man who had come in already weakened from a prior illness. I sat with DOS and reviewed what we knew. The fever was respiratory. It moved fast. It seemed to ease somewhat with hydration and the kind of close physical attention that kept the chest clear. DOS had not gone inside. He explained the protocol again. I listened. I did not tell him that the woman with no name on the kin registry had been doing exactly the physical attention work he was citing for 6 nights without dying. That 7th evening, I did not go to the gallery. I went downstairs and stood at the threshold partition myself. She was already inside. She heard me approach and looked up from across the ward. She had eyes that found a sound quickly, and then went back to what she was doing. How many tonight? I said through the bars. 49 in the ward now, she said. 7 critical. 1 who was critical yesterday is sitting up. Sitting up. He asked for broth this morning. She paused at a bedside, adjusted something I couldn't see clearly. You should have your healers bring their medical training inside, not stand at the threshold with it. The observations they're making through the bars aren't wrong. They're just incomplete. They won't go in. I know. She moved to the next cot. I'm not criticizing them. Fear is reasonable. I'm saying the information they're gathering from outside is partial. I stood at the bars for a long moment. How is it that you're not afraid? She considered the question seriously. I could see it from across the room, the slight pause in her motion, the small furrow. I am afraid, she said. I just don't find it a useful enough feeling to let it make my decisions. I had nothing to say to that. I stood at the partition until she moved into the inner room where the most critical patients lay, and then I walked back upstairs. The 8th day was when Lord Cavan came back. He brought 3 of the other senior hold lords with him, Thurris, who controlled the eastern grain routes, Aldmont, the oldest lord at my table who had served my father, and young Vale, who had his father's seat and his father's instincts for political weather. They came to my council room in the early afternoon with the look of men who had prepared their arguments. Marin Ashfield needed to be removed, Cavan said, not merely for her lack of standing, though that remained a serious concern. She had been sleeping in the supply corridor, a restricted wing without formal authorization. She had accessed a sealed ward through an unauthorized entry point. She had been providing medical attention without verified credentials. And Cavan said, lowering his voice as if this were the decisive argument, people were beginning to talk. The ward workers who had recovered enough to be conscious were asking for her by name. The hold's bonded wolves had been restless for 2 days, moving in and out of the kennel runs, gathering near the east wing. There was a quality to the situation, Cavan said, that he found unseemly. I looked at him. Unseemly, I repeated. She has no mark, Thurris said. No kin, no sponsor, no pack affiliation. Whatever she's doing in there, it doesn't carry the legitimacy of. She's been inside the sealed ward for 6 nights, I said. She has kept the count from climbing as fast as it might have climbed. She has not died. She has not made anyone else sick. She has not asked for payment or recognition or anything at all from this hold. I paused. What legitimacy exactly is she missing? The silence in the room had the particular quality of men who have an answer they know won't work. She is faithless, Aldmont said. He meant it kindly in the old way, the way the word still held a shade of pity rather than pure contempt. She is without the bond, without the spiritual foundation, without the mark of belonging. He said it as if it explained something fundamental about why her presence was irregular. No, I said. Aldmont blinked. She is the most faithful person in this hold, I said. She goes in every night without being asked. No one has sponsored her. No one is paying her. No one has thanked her. She does it because it is the thing that needs doing. I looked at all 4 of them. I will not have her removed. If any of you raises this again before the fever has run its course, you will find me significantly less patient than I have been today. They left. On the evening of the 8th day, I brought her broth. I don't know what compelled me. I had my steward prepare a flask and a cloth-covered plate, bread, dried fruit, a hard cheese, and I carried them down to the threshold myself. She came to the bars when she heard me, and I passed the flask and plate through the gap, and she looked at them and then at me with an expression that I could not fully read. Thank you, she said. You've been working since the afternoon, I said. You need to eat. She sat down against the wall just inside the bars, the plate on her knees, and ate without fuss. I sat on the bench across from the partition. We were perhaps 4 feet apart, the iron between us. After a while she said, You stopped Lord Cavan. How did you know about that? Aldmont passed through the outer hall on his way back to his rooms, she said. He stopped and looked at me through the bars for a moment. He didn't say anything. But the way he looked, men look like that when they expected something to happen and it didn't. I said nothing. You didn't have to do that, she said. I disagreed with his reasoning. You could have disagreed privately and still removed me. She broke a piece of bread. Most men in your position would have. Then most men in my position would have had fewer people sitting up and asking for broth, I said. She was quiet for a moment. In the ward behind her, someone coughed. She listened to it, assessed it. apparently decided it did not require her yet. "Is that the only reason?" she said. I looked at her through the bars. "No," I said. She did not ask what the other reason was. She finished eating and went back inside, and I sat on the bench until the ward quieted at midnight, and then I went upstairs. The warmth below my sternum had not gone away. It was neither larger nor smaller than it had been the night before. It simply sat there, steady, like a coal in a well-banked fire. The 9th night arrived with a change in the air. I knew it from the upper gallery before I understood what it was. The hold's bonded wolves, 112 of them, most sleeping in the outer kennel runs along the west wall, some permitted inside the great hall in cold weather, had been restless for 2 days, as Cavan had noted. But that restlessness had been a low-level thing, pacing and whining, the kind of agitation that came with sickness in a pack. On the 9th night, as darkness settled over the plateau and the first frost of the season silvered the courtyard stones, the restlessness became something else. I heard them first, a sound that was not quite howling and not quite the bark of alarm, something between, something I had never heard 100 bonded wolves make at once. I went to the gallery window and looked down. The wolves were moving, all of them from the kennel runs and the great hall and the inner courtyard, moving in the same direction, toward the east wing. My wolf, still and quiet for 11 years, rose. Not the surge I remembered from youth, not the bright crack of first bonding. This was slower and more certain, a tide rather than a wave. A warmth that expanded outward from the coal below my sternum, until it reached my hands and my face and the back of my throat, and I gripped the gallery rail and stood very still, while my wolf rose to his full height inside me for the first time in 11 years, and turned his face toward the east wing. He was orienting toward her. I knew it with the particular knowledge that bypasses argument, the knowledge that lives below the reasoning mind, and does not care what the reasoning mind has spent 11 years concluding. The mate bond, real and undeniable and impossibly precise, pointing toward a woman with no pack mark and a borrowed name who had been going into a sickness ward for 9 nights, because it was the thing that needed doing. I was already moving. I reached the east wing corridor at the same moment the wolves did. That is the image I will carry until I die. The corridor of the east wing, stone-floored, iron lantern lit, long and narrow and filling, quietly, without panic or crush, with wolves. They came through the outer ward access and down the inner stairs and through every passage that led to the east wing, and they moved like water finding its level, filling the space, and then they stopped. They stopped outside the door to the inner ward, where the most critical patients lay. The door was ajar. Through it I could hear Marin Ashfield's voice, low, even, unbroken, talking someone through the worst of the fever's peak. The wolves were still. 112 bonded wolves in a corridor, completely still, and not one of them had panicked, and not one of them had gone in without invitation, and the only sound in the corridor besides their breathing was her voice from the inner room. I pushed the door open. She was kneeling beside a woman who was in the final hard hours, the kind of fever that either breaks or it doesn't, and there is nothing to do but be present while it decides. Marin was holding both the woman's hands. Her own face was exhausted in a way that 11 days of night shifts will make a person's face, gray under the eyes, the skin drawn, but her voice had not wavered and her hands were not shaking. She heard me come in. She heard the wolves behind me in the corridor, 100 presences, that much living breath. It changes the air in a space, and she did not turn. She finished the sentence she was speaking to the woman on the cot. Then she looked over her shoulder. She looked at the wolves in the corridor. She looked at me. "They followed you," she said. "They followed you," I said. She looked back at the wolves for a long moment. They looked back at her. One, the oldest of the hold's bonded wolves, a gray-muzzled animal named Vardes who had lived in the hold since before I was king, stepped forward from the corridor into the room and crossed to her side and lay down. Then the next one came. And the next. They did not crowd her. They arranged themselves around her with the careful deliberateness of animals that know their own weight, leaving her room to work, lying close enough that their warmth reached her. And then, in the corridor, the rest of them knelt. I do not have a better word for what they did. A wolf does not kneel the way a man kneels. But they lowered, every one of them, chests to the stone floor, heads extended forward, in the posture that bonded wolves make only in the presence of an alpha or a declared Luna. A posture of acknowledgement that I had seen directed at my father and at me, and that I had never seen directed at anyone else. 100 bonded wolves in a corridor, heads to the stone, in the presence of a woman with no pack mark, and a borrowed name who was holding a sick woman's hands. I stood inside the doorway, and I understood, with the clarity of something that has been true for a long time and has only now arrived at the surface, that I had known she was mine since the 5th evening in the gallery. My wolf had known longer. The woman on the cot's fever broke at dawn. I know this because I was still there when it happened. I had taken a position against the wall, sitting, eventually, my back against the stone, and I had watched Marin work through the night's remaining hours, and when the woman's breathing shifted from the tight, shallow rhythm of peak fever into the slow, deeper rhythm of a body that has decided to stay, Marin sat back on her heels and pressed the heel of her hand briefly against her own eyes. It was the first time I had seen her allow herself that. She sat there for a moment, just that, her hand against her eyes, her shoulders coming down from where they had been held for however many hours. The wolves around her were warm and steady. Vardis had moved at some point in the night to lean against her side. She had not moved him away. I stood. She heard me and looked up. Her face in the early dawn light was exhausted and precise, the same face I had seen through the gallery window on the 5th evening, the face that keeps its weather inside. "She'll live," Marin said. "The fever broke cleanly." "I know," I said. "I was watching." She looked at me for a moment, the assessing look, the one that sorted information quickly. "You were here all night," she said. "Yes." You didn't have to do that either." "No," I said. "I wanted to." She was quiet. Outside in the corridor, I could hear the hold beginning to wake, footsteps on the upper floors, the distant sound of the kitchen fires being stoked. I had perhaps a quarter-hour before my steward would begin looking for me. I had perhaps less before someone told Lord Cavan that 100 wolves had taken themselves to the east wing in the night and had not come back. I did not want to have this conversation in a quarter-hour. I wanted to have it here now, before the hold's machinery reassembled around it. "Marin Ashfield," I said. She looked at me directly. She had the quality of someone who does not flinch from being spoken to plainly. "I have to tell you something," I said, "and I want to tell you honestly, without the ceremony and the hold lords and the formal declaration, because you have spent 9 nights doing something honest in an honest way, and I think you are owed the same." She said nothing. She waited. "My wolf has been silent for 11 years, I said. "He was silent when my mate died. I had concluded that he was done, that the bond had burned out with her death, and that I was a man who would rule without it. I had made my peace with that." I paused. "Last night, standing at the gallery window, watching all of this hold's wolves move toward you," he rose, "for the first time in 11 years. I looked at her steadily. "He pointed at you. He has been pointing at you since the 5th evening." I simply didn't know what I was feeling until I couldn't ignore it anymore. She was still. "I am telling you this," I said, "before I call Lord Cavan and the hold lords here and make a formal declaration, because I want you to know it first in plain language, without an audience, and I want you to have the chance to say whatever you need to say to me before the hold ceremony turns this into something larger than 2 people in a room." The dawn light was coming through the narrow east window of the inner ward. It fell on the cot where the woman who had survived the night was sleeping, and on the wolves arranged around Marin, and on Marin's face. "You're the Alpha King," she said. "Yes." I have no pack mark, she said. I have no kin registered. My name is a field name, the kind given at charity institutions to children who arrive without family. I have no standing in this hold and no standing in any hold. I know exactly what you have and don't have, I said. I read your registration on the 5th morning. None of those things are what I am looking at. What are you looking at? She said. It was a real question, asked in the direct way she asked everything. Someone who went into a room that no one else would enter, I said, without being asked, without being paid, without any promise of recognition or safety, for 9 nights in a row, who sat with people at the worst moments of their lives and did not leave, who told me she was afraid and then told me she didn't find it useful enough to let it make her decisions. I paused. I am looking at someone whose faith is the realest thing in this hold. I have been looking at it for 9 days. My wolf recognized it before I had the language for it. Marin Ashfield sat in the morning light with her hands in her lap, and she was quiet for a long moment. All right, she said. All right, I repeated. I have a question, she said. Before any of the rest of it, before the hold lords and the declaration. Ask it, I said. She looked at me with those still, quick eyes. Will you let me keep doing this work? I had not expected that question. I do not know what I had expected, surprise, protest. A practical question about what the bond meant for a woman with no standing. Not that one. Yes, I said. It came out without hesitation, without negotiation, without calculation about what it would mean for the hold's medical protocols or Lord Cavan's opinions about unseemly situations. It was simply and completely true. Yes, whatever form it takes, whatever structure we build around it so you have the access and the resources you need, yes. This hold needs what you do, more than it needs what I can do most days. She looked at me for a long moment after that. All right, she said again, but this time it was different. The first all right had been acknowledgement. This one was something else. This one had weight to it, the weight of a door opening. She reached out, very precisely, with the careful economy of motion that was characteristic of everything she did, and she put her hand in mine. Her hand was calloused and warm, and she held my hand the way she had held the hands of the people in the cots, without performance, without self-consciousness, with total presence. Vardes, lying beside her, lifted his gray head and looked at the joined hands, and then lay his head back down with the expression of an old wolf, who has been waiting a considerable time for the obvious to become apparent. I sent for Lord Cavan. I sent for Thuris, Aldmont, Vale, and the 6 other senior hold lords. I sent for Das and the hold healers. I sent for Bren, my steward, who arrived already knowing from the expression on the runner's face that something significant had occurred overnight. They came to the East Wing corridor. They found 112 of the hold's bonded wolves still arrayed in the corridor, most of them having risen from their prone positions to standing, but none of them having left. They found the inner ward door open, and the ward's survivors, those well enough to sit or stand, awake and aware. They found me standing in the inner ward doorway with Marin Ashfield beside me. She had washed her face and straightened her apron. She had not changed her clothes. She was exactly as she had been all night, except that she had slept for 1 hour on the bench outside the inner ward while I sat beside her and kept watch, because I had told her she would have the hour and I was going to see to it. The hold lords came in with the expression of men sorting rapidly through what they were seeing. Cavan saw the wolves first, 100 bonded wolves at attention in the east corridor, which is not a thing that happens at random, and his face did through several stages of processing before it settled on something approaching careful attention. I waited until they were all assembled. Lord Cavan, I said, you told me 9 days ago that the woman beside me was faithless. I would like to address that word directly, in front of this assembly, because I believe it deserves a direct answer. Cavan looked at Marin, he looked at the wolves, he looked at me. Faithless, I said, is the word this hold uses for a person without pack affiliation, without a mark, without a sponsor or a kin line. It implies a deficit of character, an absence of the bond that the old families believed was the source of moral standing. I looked at him steadily. I have watched this woman for 9 days. She entered a sealed sickness ward on the second day of the fever, through a supply hatch without being asked, without any promise of protection or recognition. She has worked every night for 9 nights. She has not made anyone sicker. She has made several people who were very sick into people who are now sitting up and asking for broth. She sat with those who were dying so that they did not die alone. When the fever peaked last night and the protocol your healers had developed proved insufficient, she was already inside, doing the work that needed doing. The corridor was very quiet. In the ward behind me, someone coughed gently, the productive, clearing cough of a body on the mend. Last night, I said, every bonded wolf in this hold left their kennels and came to this corridor. They came because of her. I let that land. In 11 years as your king, I have not seen that. In my father's 30 years before me, it did not happen. The wolves of Draven Hold lay in that corridor and they bowed their heads, and they have not left. If you require a credentialing body more reliable than 100 bonded wolves acting in concert, I would be very interested to know which one you have in mind. Not a sound from the assembled lords. The mate bond that I lost 11 years ago, I said, recognized itself last night. It recognized her. I turned to Marin. Marin Ashfield is my fated mate. I am declaring that here in front of you, in front of the wolves that have already acknowledged it, and in front of the people in this ward who have been in her care. I looked back at the lords. She will be given full hold standing, effective immediately. She will have whatever resources and access she needs to continue the work she has been doing. And if I hear the word faithless used in reference to her again, I will consider it a personal address, and I will respond to it accordingly. The silence in the corridor stretched out long and clean. Lord Aldmont, old Aldmont, who had served my father, who had used the word faithless with genuine sorrow on his face because he meant the old thing by it, the loss of a bond, Lord Aldmont looked at Marin for a long moment. Then he bent his head. It was a slight bow, the kind that a lord gives to a declaration of standing. But it was real, and it was first, and when he made it the others followed, Cavan with his face arranged into something that was not pleasure but was not resistance either. Thuris, who had interests enough to calculate which side of this moment to land on. Vale, the youngest, who looked genuinely, unexpectedly moved. Marin stood beside me and received the bows of the hold lords with the same stillness with which she had received everything else. She did not smile triumphantly. She did not look at me for validation. She looked at the lords, and she looked at the corridor of wolves, and she looked at the ward behind us where the sick were resting, and her face was its own thing, tired and steady, and in some interior chamber of it that she probably thought was invisible, warm. It was visible. I could see it clearly from where I was standing. The fever ran its course in 4 more days. By the end of those 4 days, Das had gone inside. He was not pleased about it, but Marin had spent 2 of the final evenings in technical conversation with him through the bars, not arguing, not persuading, simply telling him what she was observing and what she had found to be effective. And on the 3rd evening he had taken a breath and come through the supply hatch himself. He was a good healer underneath the protocol. Inside the ward, watching her work, I believe he understood several things that had previously been theoretical. The last of the fever patients was discharged on the 23rd of the harvest month. The ward was aired and cleaned, and the supply hatch was properly sealed, though I noted that Marin observed the sealing with an expression that suggested she was identifying the next one. I was not wrong. 2 weeks later I found her in a conversation with my steward Bren about the hold's secondary medical supply access points, their structural conditions, and which ones could be improved to allow faster entry in future emergencies. Bren was taking notes. He had the look of a man who has discovered that someone else in the hold is better at logistics than he is, and has decided to be relieved rather than offended by it. I stood in the doorway and listened for a while without interrupting. Then I caught Marin's eye, and she looked at me with an expression that was, for her, quite openly amused, which on her face meant a slight quickening of the eyes and a compression of the mouth that was not quite a smile but was pointed in that direction. I left them to it. The formal ceremony was held at the winter solstice, 6 weeks after the fever. It was my hold lord's concession to tradition. There are forms for declaring a fated mate. Ancient ones, and Aldmont in particular, felt strongly that the form should be honored. Marin agreed, to my mild surprise. "They matter to the hold," she said when I asked. "The forms aren't for us, they're for everyone else." She was right. She was frequently right in the way that people are when they have spent years observing how communities actually function, rather than how they are supposed to function in theory. The ceremony was in the great hall, iron-chain chandeliers lit with winter candles, the hold lords in their formal wear, the pack assembled. Vardys led the bonded wolves into the hall at the beginning of the rite, a thing that had not been done since my father's time, and the wolves arranged themselves along the walls as if they had been rehearsed, which they had not been. Marin walked into the great hall in a gray dress, not a grand dress, not a Luna's formal gown, though we had offered one. A good wool dress, well made, that she had selected with the same economy she applied to everything. She had allowed her hair to be dressed. She wore, at her left wrist, the hold's formal mating mark, not the spontaneous mark of the bond, which had come quietly in the night between the fever's ending and the morning after, but the formal mark that my hold's tradition required, applied by the hold ceremony keeper in the old silver ink. She stood beside me at the center of the great hall, and she received the formal words of the rite, and she spoke the formal responses, which she had memorized precisely, having asked Bren for the text 3 weeks in advance, and studied it the way she studied everything, completely and without drama. When the rite was completed, the hold lords bowed. Lord Cavan was among them. His bow was not warm, but it was correct, and correctness from Cavan was, I had come to understand, a form of respect in its own register. After the ceremony, the hold gathered in the great hall for the feast. Marin ate with the same attention she gave everything, actually tasting the food, actually listening to whoever was speaking to her, not performing the role of Luna at feast, but simply being a person at a table. I watched her from across the hall for a while. She was in conversation with Das, and from the angle of Das's head I could tell he was asking her something technical. I watched her answer, gesturing slightly, clearly explaining something about procedure or observation, and I watched Das's face shift from the slightly beleaguered expression of a man whose professional certainties have been complicated, into something that was, tentatively, collegial. "Good. It is the 32nd of the winter month now. The fever has been over for 2 months. Marin has, in those 2 months, redesigned the hold's fever ward access protocol in consultation with Das, established a small satellite healing room near the east wing that is properly supplied and doesn't rely on supply hatches, trained 3 of the hold's younger healers in the observational methods she used during the outbreak, and submitted to Bren a written proposal for a circuit of the outlying plateau settlements to assess their medical access before the deep winter sets in. I read the proposal over her shoulder while she was finalizing it. She did not look up. She said, "I know you're going to say yes." "I was going to ask if you want company on the circuit," I said. She did look up then. "The Alpha King," she said, "riding the medical circuit." "The Alpha King has not left the hold on a circuit since before the fever," I said. "The outlying settlements would benefit from the attention, and I find that I have particular reasons to be interested in how they are doing." She looked at me with those quick, still eyes. "All right," she said. "The third all right. It has the most weight of the 3. She uses it the way she uses everything, economically, precisely, with total presence. When Marin Ashfield says all right, it is not capitulation and it is not performance. It is the thing itself. There is something I want to say about the word faithless. I have been thinking about it since Cavan first used it in the briefing room on the 5th day of the fever. I understand the word's history. I was raised with it. The old families use it. It is embedded in the whole social language in a way that will take more than one winter to change. I am going to change it anyway, with the patience required, because I am a patient man and I have time and I have a partner who is better at the quiet work of changing things than anyone I have ever met. But I want to say this for myself, as a man who lost a mate and concluded the bond had burned out and spent 11 years in the controlled gray space of a kingdom that runs precisely and without wonder. The most faithful person I have ever known walked into a sealed sickness ward with a lamp and a kit bag, without a pack mark, without a kin line, without a sponsor, without anyone asking her to. And she did it again the next night and the night after that, and she did not stop. She did not do it for recognition. She did not do it for the bond or the hold or the Alpha King. She did it because the people inside needed tending, and she was the person present who could tend them. That is faith. The old word, the real one, the one before it got reduced to a tattoo at the base of the throat. A steady going toward without guarantee of return, because the going toward is right. My wolf knew it before I had the language. The hold's 100 wolves knew it before I admitted I did. The woman who survived the fever's worst night knew it when she woke and found Marin still beside her. I was the last to arrive at the knowing, but I arrived. On the morning we leave for the plateau circuit, I find Marin in the East Wing, not in the new satellite room, not in Das's offices, but in the inner ward where the fever patients were, now aired and empty, the cots folded against the wall, the iron lanterns clean. She is standing in the middle of the room looking at nothing in particular. Vardes is beside her. The old wolf goes where she goes now, as if he has appointed himself and the appointment is not subject to review. She hears me come in and doesn't turn immediately. She finishes whatever she is doing inside herself, that interior process, the one I am learning to recognize and not interrupt, and then she turns. "Ready?" I say. "Yes," she says. She picks up her kit bag. She has the same kit bag from the first night, worn at the strap, competently mended in 2 places. I offered to have a new one made, and she told me the old one suited her purposes and she knew where everything was. I did not argue. We walk out of the East Wing together, Vardes at her left side, into the hold's morning. The plateau is cold and gray-silver, the first hard frost of December on the stones, the sky the color of iron. The hold's horses are saddled and waiting. The 2 younger healers Marin has been training are waiting with their own horses. She asked to bring them. She said the circuit would be better training than anything she could teach them in a room. She is not wrong. I help her mount. She does not need the help. She is a competent rider, but she has accepted that I will offer and she has decided she will allow it. And there is something in that small negotiated allowance that I find I would not trade for much. She settles into the saddle. She looks across the plateau toward the first settlement on the circuit, which is half a morning's ride. "You're going to want to stop at the Heron Crossing," she says. "Their elder wrote to Bren 3 weeks ago about a water issue. I think it's probably a silt problem in the intake, but I'd want to look at it." "All right," I said. She looks at me. The quick eyes, the face that keeps its weather inside, the faint quickening that is, I have learned the thing on her face that corresponds to warmth. "You've been practicing that," she says. "I've been practicing that," I confirm. She turns her horse toward the plateau road. I ride beside her. Vardes follows, gray and unhurried, as if all of this was already settled a long time ago, and we have simply taken our time arriving at it. The cold morning opens before us. Somewhere behind us in the hold, 100 wolves are sleeping against the outer wall, warm in their runs, unbothered. They have done their work. They knew before I did. They are content to wait for us to come back. That is the thing I carry, not the ceremony, not the declaration, not the hold lords bowing in the East Wing corridor, though those things mattered. I carry the image of a gray morning and a plateau road, and the woman beside me with her kit bag and her practical eyes and her third all right, which is the realest yes I have ever been given, and the understanding that some things are faithful long before they are named, that the bond was already there, in the going toward, in the lamp carried into the dark ward, in the 9 nights of steady work that no one had asked for and everyone had needed. She did not wait to be recognized before she was faithful. I am still learning from that.